very pleased today to be back at the Oklahoma City Memorial and Museum with Lynne Porter. The National History Academy is offering a series of these free webinars each week that we hope to continue throughout the year. And we're also just starting to recruit for our summer programs this summer. We've got a number of online summer programs, both for high school students and middle school students, 1-week programs, and we're also going to be announcing some shorter programs shortly. And you can check that out on our website at www.nationalhistoryacademy.org. And to introduce our guest today, I'd like to turn it over to our Director of Middle School Education, Amy Trinkle, who's also a middle school teacher at Alice Deal Middle School in Washington, D.C., and an adjunct professor at American University in Washington. So, Amy?
Thank you, Bill, and welcome everyone. Welcome to National History Academy's live virtual series. We are visiting Oklahoma City today in the Oklahoma City National Memorial and Museum, and so honored to be hosted today by Lynne Porter, the Director of Educational Experience, who has been a friend of National History Academy and led us through a tour last summer, and so excited to be back to be able to hear this important history today. So thank you, Lynne, and we look forward to going on our tour with you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Amy. Appreciate being here with you guys today. As she said, I'm Lynne Porter with the Oklahoma City National Memorial Museum, and today I'm going to kind of take you through what happened moments before the bombing, during the bombing, and after, and how the city grew from this and the resilience and hope that came out of this tragedy. So first off, I'm going to show you, kind of get you situated on the scene as it was in 1995. Here is the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. We are in the building right by it, right across the street. Right here is where I'm standing in right now. You'll also notice that you see 5th Street right in front here, and that's important because we will talk about that in a little bit, where the placement of the truck was. So it was just a normal day. Everyone was going to work. People were taking their kids to the daycare in the Federal Building. People were going to work. Just a beautiful spring morning. But it changed very quickly at 9:02 a.m. So I'm going to take you over here, and we're going to look out the window at an apartment building where a piece of critical evidence was found that really started the ball rolling on who did this awful crime. So you'll see out here, retail apartment and right axle. Now that rear axle was off a Ryder truck, a moving company truck. And you'll see here in a photograph that was taken from a surveillance camera in the Regency Tower, you can see that Ryder truck that came. And it just about a block away from that, it kept on traveling on that road, 5th Street, which we just saw a second ago. And that was in front, and it parked in front of the Murrah building, just on the side where delivery trucks pulled up. And so this was captured at 8:56 a.m. and the bombing occurred at 9:02 a.m. So he lit the fuse when he was down the street, and then the bomb took off. So you'll see over here the new Federal Building that they have out this window. Now you see some key things in front of it. You'll see some bollards, some things that block cars from getting close to the building. That was a security measure that was put into place after the bombing, because at the time, of course, Timothy McVeigh again was able to come right next to the building and place those bombs. And so their new security measures came into place, and that's our new Federal Building here in Oklahoma City. The Federal Building housed 20 different agencies. 17 of those were federal agencies. And we'll talk a little bit about all of those here in a minute, but one in particular was the alcohol, tobacco, and firearms. They were in that building. Now, if you look over here, people ask, they often wonder, why did Timothy McVeigh do this? And why did he pick this particular building? There's several schools of thought that he never testified in court. But they kind of put some things together. You'll see Timothy McVeigh here on his car, and he had some propaganda, some anti-government literature. This was on the scene in Waco, Texas. So in Waco, Texas, 2 years before the bombing, there was an incident, and there was a compound, and people there were called Branch Davidians. David Koresh was the leader of this. Now, they had some illegal firearms, some illegal weapons. The alcohol, tobacco, and firearms came to serve a warrant on them. During that serving, there was some gunfire, and ATF agents were killed, and some people in the compound were killed. There started a 51-day standoff, and at the end of that, a fire started inside the compound, killing about 75 men, women, and children. Well, that fire happened on April 19th, 1993. They think that he picked this building perhaps because ATF was housed in it. Also, the spokesperson for that incident in Waco was from Oklahoma City. However, the FBI building was not, their offices weren't there. But they think also he picked the April 19th date to correspond when the fire occurred. And there was also an incident in Ruby Ridge, Idaho, a few years before that. So he really felt, he and his co-conspirators felt that the government was overreaching their authority into personal freedoms. They also read this book, The Turner Diaries, that talked about an overthrow of the government and had a similar incident as overthrowing the Murrah building. We think that he got his ideas from there. So sadly, there was also a daycare in the building. So 19 children died in total. There were 21 kids in the daycare. 6 of those survived, and some children died that were in the Social Security office. So not all children died. About 445 people worked in the building, in the Murrah building. About 361 were there that day. So there were a lot of survivors off of that. 163 people died from the Murrah building. The other 5 were from different buildings, and 1 rescuer was killed, and we'll talk about her in a moment. So there was the explosion at 9:02 a.m., and there was a lot of chaos after that. And so people didn't know what was happening. They thought there was a natural gas explosion. And so you'll see as we enter this room, the chaos that went around, and you'll hear some of the chaos that was going on. And a lot of personal artifacts, personal effects of people just working in their office. This bronze sill, it weighs about 300 pounds. It was on the north entrance of the Murrah building, and you can see where shrapnel hit this from different vehicles and different things from the high explosive event. Now, I mentioned the Regency Towers and showed you the apartment, and that there was an important piece of evidence that was found there. That piece of evidence was the rear axle. That rear axle belonged to the Ryder truck. And on that piece, there was a VIN number, vehicle identification number. And this was just found within an hour of the explosion. Now, pretty quickly, they knew that it was a bomb because they could smell the ammonium nitrate. But then when they started seeing different vehicle pieces like this, they could tell from the characteristics of that it was a bombing. So this vehicle identification number, they were able to take that and trace it back to Elliott's Body Shop in Junction City, Kansas, where the perpetrator rented that truck. And so it was just really quick police work that was doing that. So then they went to Elliot's Body Shop, and we'll learn a little bit later what came of that. So here is the license plate that was off of the truck. And a picture of Elliot's Body Shop in Junction City, Kansas, where it was rented. Over here, you'll see a picture of the bombed out building. So about a third of the building came down. It kind of pancaked down. It was 9 stories. And so most people, if they came around this side, they didn't really see any damage. They saw a lot of glass that was on the ground, different things like that. But once they turned around, they could see the what the explosion was. And there's a lot of debris in there, but the big crater, which again made it where they could tell that it was a bomb. Right here is the survivor tree. It was in the middle of the parking lot, and we're going to see that later in how it looks today. But it was just this small tree that was just, again, hanging out with all these cars and just in a concrete slab. And you will see that later and how it is today, because it's an important symbol of resilience to all that see it. Sorry. All right, so the media. In 1995, we didn't have cell phones, or if you did, they were the size of a brick, and we'll see one of those in a minute. But soon, news agencies from all over the world came to report on this incident. We didn't have 24-hour news at that time, but they started having the news on 24 hours right after this. So as I mentioned, there was the cell phones that they had were very large. A lot of people didn't have them. It was very expensive to have. So you couldn't text people to let them know that you were okay, or you couldn't take pictures with it and send them to people. So the technology is vastly different today. But they had it was reporting from all over the world, from Los Angeles to Tokyo, Tel Aviv. So it was definitely a worldwide event. Again, in 1995, you just didn't hear about domestic terrorism here in the United States. You would hear a lot about international terrorism, but we just did not have any big terrorist attacks at the time. And it still does, this incident still remains the largest domestic terrorist attack. So within minutes, there were firefighters, first responders, police officers, all came down to see what they could do. This is a bunker suit jacket that was worn by the incident commander. He also wore this white helmet, and some of his chiefs were wearing these red helmets. But again, they came quickly. We have a fire station that's just blocks away who rushed to the scene. They didn't even have to be called. They just knew something was going on. So they all came down. There were 11 urban search and rescue teams that came to help out, because we did not have an urban search and rescue team. They have specialized equipment to look at to help with structural, building collapse, different things like that, and also rescue dogs. And so we had specialized teams that came in quickly and helped, assisted, and you'll see again all of the different floors here, and all of the different people help with the rescue dogs, the debris. They had to bring in structural engineers along with the firefighters to put up different beams, different structural supports to help support the building when they went in, because it wasn't very structurally sound. Now, it was a beautiful sunny day in the morning. However, in the evening, by the end of the day, it was raining a lot, plus there were tornado warnings. They actually had to drill holes through the building so the winds could go through the whole building, because so it would help with keeping it intact and up. Now, the last known victim was just out, live victim came out that same day on the 19th. No live individuals were found after that time. The search and rescue lasted until May 4th. On May 4th, they ended for the last 3 were in a place where they couldn't get to, but they thought that's where they were. And they had to implode the building and then get those last 3 individuals out. So again, that ended on May 4th. We have what we call here in Oklahoma, the Oklahoma Standard. And that phrase was coined after this event. You see here people lined up for hours to donate blood. They also brought food. There was a restaurant association convention at that time, so they stayed on and helped prepare food for the first responders, rescuers, anyone that helped. They had first aid stations set up where they could get any kind of supplies they needed. They even had masseuses, people to give haircuts, anything that anyone needed, they were down here. And that became known as the Oklahoma Standard, kindness, honor, and service. And so, again, that outpouring continued for weeks and months. And to today, we have people that have acts of kindness, service, and honor. So once they were able to trace the Ryder truck to Elliot's Body Shop, the FBI went there and talked to the people that worked there, and they did a police sketch of Timothy McVeigh. Sorry. So they actually had John Doe 1 and John Doe number 2. Now, John Doe number 2, they ended up finding out that he rented a Ryder truck just a day before. So he was actually not involved at this at all. But you'll notice over here, you'll see Timothy McVeigh's mugshot, and it's an extreme likeness of what the mugshot looks like. So it's very interesting that the individual is able to remember that, because he rented that earlier that week on that Sunday, and this happened on a Wednesday. So they were able to remember that. This is the shirt that Timothy McVeigh had on. It had on the back of it were the words used by President Thomas Jefferson: "The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants." So he had that on, and most of his clothing had explosive residue on it when they tested it. So again, that could kind of help convict him at that time. It was difficult for families to find out what happened to their loved ones, because we didn't have those cell phones. You couldn't text people. The internet was in its infancy, so they couldn't just look at a list online and see, is my loved one okay? Where are they? So they had a family assistance center that they opened. It was at a church nearby. And so all of the families would go there, and they had different clergy there. They had pastors, rabbis, pastors, everyone came, and counselors, they had food. And so the families were there, and they were updated if their family member was they were in a hospital or they were deceased, but they found all of that information there. Talking about the Oklahoma Standard, you're never too young to do something that makes a difference in someone's life. We had children from all over the country send cards and letters of support. And these were given to first responders, to survivors, family members. And we have people today that receive some of these and have kept them to this day. And they just said that it made such a difference to know that people were thinking of them and supporting them. So it makes such a difference. And again, even a card letter that you just personally do will make a difference in someone's life. So we talked about the Urban Search and Rescue Task Force that came, and these flags were hung in the Murrah building from those different rescue agencies that came. We are going down to the next floor where we're going to go into the Gallery of Honor. Now, the Gallery of Honor is shadow boxes of all 168 individuals that died. And their families were able to select an item or items that represented their lives, because we wanted to make sure that it was not just the number, 168, but you knew the unique characteristics of each of those individuals that made them special. So we have all of their names as we go along this way here. And then we'll go into the Gallery of Honor, where again, you'll see specially selected items that families gave to represent their loved ones. Every April 19th, we have a remembrance ceremony, and all 168 names are read, and that's what you're hearing right now. We also have interactives at the museum, so people are able to hear stories about all of these individuals on some computers here, and just to learn a little bit more about each of them. Straight ahead, we see the survivor tree. And we will see that in person here in a few minutes. But again, it was small at the time of the bombing, and we will see how it looks today. So what was interesting about this event is, first, it was a rescue and recovery. They didn't know it was a bombing, but once they knew it was a bombing, it became a crime scene. So it's important that they cordoned off that area to protect the evidence. So we have this fence here, and people started to send condolences, put items of support on there to make sure people were known that they were being supported and cared about. And so, and people didn't know what to do. So this was just something small that they could show their support. When just within weeks of the bombing, it was Mayor Ron Norick at the time. He said, hey, we need to make sure that we memorialize these individuals and have a way to educate people about the senselessness of violence. So a 350-member task force was put together, and that was composed of family members, survivors, first responders, people from the community, and they had started off with an international design competition. That was for the memorial outside part. And so 624 designs were submitted. They came upon the winning design by the Bootsers, Tori and Hans, and we'll see that design momentarily. But that actually was opened in 2000, so just 5 years after the explosion. And then in 2001, this museum was created and opened to make sure that people knew again about the senselessness of violence and can learn about resilience and hope, and what this city and nation did to come back from this and show that good always triumphs evil. Now, the fence was not part of the original design for the Outdoor Symbolic Memorial, but it became such an important symbol of hope and support that everyone said, we need to incorporate that into the design. So it was added later, and you can see some pictures of individuals, rescue workers and family members and survivors, moving that to its permanent location where it is right now outside in the memorial. In 2000, President Clinton came to help dedicate the memorial, and in 2001, President Bush helped dedicate the museum. Now, Timothy McVeigh had put a getaway car just a block away from the building, the Murrah building. This is his getaway car. And you'll notice that there is not a license plate. That really was his downfall, because the police officer, he was about, again, 75 minutes away from the bombing from Oklahoma City in near Perry, Oklahoma, which you see in the background here. And an officer pulled him over for not having a license plate. Well, that's not an arrestable offense, but what was at that time is he had a concealed weapon. He had a gun underneath his jacket. That was not allowed at that time. He couldn't have concealed weapon. So he was booked into jail because of that. Originally, people that have this type of event, something beeps on here. In this event, usually they would just bond out quickly. You could pay some money and get out of jail. But the next day, he got out of jail, or he was going to get out of jail, but the judge was delayed, so he had to. Is it still going? You think? Oh, so the judge had to see him on Friday morning. Well, Friday morning, the judge's son missed a field trip. So he had to drive him 30 miles for his field trip. Well, then that field trip, so he got back, and by that time, the FBI had put more things together. So from the Elliott's Body Shop, they canvassed the area and went to Dreamland Hotel. And at that hotel, he had a registration under Timothy McVeigh, but he ordered Chinese food with Robert Kling. Well, Robert Kling was the name that he used when he rented the Ryder truck. So they could connect that. So they knew Timothy McVeigh by name by that Friday, and found out that he was in Perry, Oklahoma by looking on the computer of any arrests under that name, and his name was on there. So on Friday, he was being prosecuted or under arrest for the bombing. You'll see on this map that there's many states that they looked at to find evidence against him. Now, all the perpetrators that were in this, Timothy McVeigh, Terry Nichols, and Michael Fortier, they all met each other in the Army. And that's, again, once they all got out, they had some anti-government positions, and then started all kind of collaborating on what could we do. So that's how they knew each other. This went all the way to the Philippines, that they did some digging there. There were over 23,000 pieces of evidence collected, over 235 pictures taken. A really interesting piece of evidence was this key. This is a key to the Ryder truck, and it was found right next to where the getaway car was parked. So he must have dropped it right when he got into the vehicle. These barrels right here were found at Terry Nichols' house. There was plastic shards, plastic of it, found at the crime scene, so they could put those together. They had the same composition. So once they had Timothy McVeigh in custody and everything, they started preparing for the trials. Now, they started with the federal trials. Murder is actually a state crime. However, since there were 8 federal agents in the building, then they were able to bring federal charges. But that was only for the 8 federal agents, not for the other 160, and we'll talk about that in a minute. He was convicted and sentenced to death. He was put to death in 2001 on June 11th. He waived all of his appeals. Otherwise, usually people live a lot longer on death row, but he waived all his appeals, and just within 6 years, he was sentenced. He was put to death by lethal injection. Now, Terry Nichols was also brought up in federal court, and he was charged with conspiracy with a weapon of mass destruction and use of weapon of mass destruction. And he was convicted of, got a life sentence. So he was, again, sentenced to life, but he was also brought up in state charges for the other 160 that did not get their day in court. He went to, so Oklahoma tried him. He was also convicted, given a life sentence in Oklahoma, but for 161 counts of murder, because there are 3 women that were pregnant, and one would have, the baby would have survived had she not died, and so they were able to bring murder charges for that unborn baby as well. He is serving a life sentence now in Florence, Colorado. It's a supermax prison. He gets out just 1 hour a day, so it's basically in his cell 23 hours a day. Now, Michael and Lori Fortier, they knew about this. Again, all of the men had known each other from the military. They knew about the event. They even helped him in some ways. Lori made the fake ID he rented the Ryder truck with, and he helped sell some stolen weapons to help fund the building the explosives and getting all of that. But they decided later, you know what, we don't want anything to do with it. But they never came forward to alert the authorities. Had they come forward, maybe 168 lives would have been saved. So it's so important if you see something to say something. In exchange for their testimony, they got a plea bargain. Lori got immunity, so she didn't know jail time, but Michael Fortier had to spend 10.5 years out of a 12-year prison sentence for failure to alert authorities. They are in the witness protection program. Their identities are changed, names, so we do not know where they are at currently. Now, you'll see behind me here that we have this. Remember, this was a building right across from the Murrah building. This was actually a door to the men's restroom. So this damage was done in this building. No one died in this building, but there were many, many injuries from mainly the glass shards, which after this incident, they make blast-resistant glass put in all federal buildings to reduce any type of injuries caused from glass shards. One quote that I always think is so powerful, after the state trial of Terry Nichols, Judge Taylor, who was a justice here in Oklahoma after this, he says, "It is truly ironic that the very government and the Constitution you profess to hate is the very government that assured you a fair trial and protected your rights." And it's true. They hated the government, yet the government allowed them to have a fair trial. That's why the trial was moved from Oklahoma, the federal ones, to Denver, Colorado. And the state trial, even in Oklahoma, was moved to about 3 hours out to McAlester, Oklahoma. Our last stop on this tour is the memorial, the Outdoor Symbolic Memorial. So you're going to first see a reflecting pool, and that is where 5th Street was. So, and then across from the pool are chairs. There's 168 chairs. They are in 9 rows. That's because there are 9 floors in the Murrah building. And names of each individual are etched on the glass base. Wherever that individual worked or was in the building on that day, that's where their chair is placed. There are 19 of them are smaller, and that's for the children. You'll also see 2 gates of time. One is 901 and one is 903. 901 represents the innocence before the explosion at 902. And 903, you leave forever changed and hopefully leave with resilience and hope. And you'll see also the survivor tree. It's an American elm. It's over 100 years old. Just a interesting fact about this is, you know, trees don't live forever. And so we have about 5 clones of this tree. So when this does die, that there's some of the survivor tree that will replace it. We also give away the saplings of this tree every anniversary. You can pick those up here at the remembrance ceremony, or you can order one online in our store, a sapling. So there's survivor tree saplings all over the United States. There's also on my left, way over there, there's 2 granite slabs. I'm not sure if you can see them from here, but they are on there are names of survivors. So over 600 survivors are etched on there, their names of what building they were in. You'll also see just a portion of the fence, and that was again part of the fence that people wanted to make sure that they kept. That was first put up because of cording off the area to keep people away from the crime area, but also that was put up because there was one rescue worker, a nurse, that ran in to help, and she was hit with debris and killed. So she was the only really first responder that was killed in this incident. So I'm going to hand it over. This is kind of the conclusion of the tour, but I want to make sure that I give time for you all to ask questions. So at this time, I'll let you guys ask any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Lynn. We really appreciate the tour and all the information that you shared with us. We do have a couple of questions for you.
Great.
Ranging across the museum and the memorial. One of our questions that came in was, there seemed to be a lot of personal items on display. How involved were the family and friends of those lost in the creation of the museum itself?
Yeah, that's a great question. Of the 350 member task force, that's mainly, it was all comprised of family members, survivors, and first responders. So they were an integral part of the design and the creation of this museum. It was important for us to make sure that we honored their loved ones and also took in all of their wishes and what they feel was important in this. So they felt that this was part of theirs as well in their creation. So they remain a critical part in anything we do. We have a conscience committee that's comprised of family members, survivors, and first responders. So anything that we do in this museum, special events or enhancements of the museum, it goes through that committee first to make sure that we're respecting everybody's wishes.
Wow, so that's a great lead into our next question of thinking about your museum and thinking about, are there any new displays or events planned for the future and new stories to tell or different ways to share stories and legacies of individuals?
Yeah, we are actually doing a couple new exhibits coming up, and one is actually from Broken Arrow. It's a town nearby, about an hour and a half away, and their students actually, they were art students, and they took each individual that died and researched them. They created a special painting that represented their lives. And so we're going to put their art on display starting in April. And then after that exhibit is finished, then we are actually giving them to the family members for them to have. We also have another exhibit coming up that's it's the 20th anniversary of the creation of the museum. So it's an exhibit about how this museum was created and a few things talking about that process. Now, the car that we saw and some of the other items that we have on display now, we did not have that on display when this museum first opened. That just happened about 6 or 7 years ago, because it was really difficult for families to have anything that was on display about the perpetrators. So we didn't have a lot of stuff about them in the beginning. And plus the FBI still had those in their warehouses. So we get different along the way, different times the FBI will release new artifacts to us, and sometimes we'll put those on display, or it's been long enough where people want to know a little bit more about the perpetrators, but again, all of that, anything new or controversial, we go through our conscience committee to make sure that that's okay with them.
Wow, thank you. We have another question as well, more connected to current events as well, but have the events of January 6th at the U.S. Capitol changed your education outreach and interpretation?
Very good question. We did put some information out, some lesson plans for teachers after that to go to talk to their students about the instruction. We do see definitely domestic terrorism as a huge issue and extremism at this time. We had recently, within this last month, we had a webinar on domestic terrorism and have a specialist come in. So that is something, there's not a law, a domestic terrorism law. We have a definition, but that we don't have laws on domestic terrorism. So that's something that we certainly feel that needs to be addressed for people to be able to be convicted of domestic terrorism. So we do see January 6th definitely as part of that, the hatred of the government or trying to overthrow something, a huge concern. So we are looking at more things on how can we fight extremism and domestic terrorism and of course violence, because Timothy McVeigh, violence does not solve any problems. So looking at using your voice to change legislation. There were a lot of laws that the survivors and family members changed after this. They were angry about, and so there were some laws changed because of their actions and going through the proper channels. And so we want to promote that again, that we have a program called Better Conversations, where we feel that there needs to be more dialogue and more people coming together and listening to other perspectives.
That's amazing. And then, you keep leading into the next question. You mentioned that there were changes that were made afterwards. So I was wondering if you could speak to any of the state or federal policy changes that may have happened after the bombing.
Sure. As I mentioned, Timothy McVeigh, he waived his appeals, but there were the length of time between appeals was very long. And so some families are like, I don't want that person to be on death row forever. I don't want him to be able to. So the amount of appeals and the length between them was reduced. And that was because of family members and survivors. Also, if you were if you wanted to go to court and you were a witness, impact witness, you weren't able to watch the proceedings, which they didn't think was fair. So they got that changed where you could still watch be an impact witness, but also watch the testimony and the trial. Also, the trial was in Denver. Not a lot of people could go there. So they were able to find a law that allowed that to be satellited back into Oklahoma City for people to look at. So that's just a few of them that changed.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. One other question, you talked about the Oklahoma standard, and I was just wondering and you talked about the students, and you talked about people coming out and supporting. How do you see the Oklahoma standard being shared today?
Oh gosh. Well, we in Oklahoma, we have tornadoes. So that's just one of the things we do. So after tornadoes, you see people coming together to, in the community, coming together to help one another, whatever they need. When we had a freeze recently, we aren't used to having really low temperatures like -18, different things like that. So just people, different places open their doors to the homeless to make sure that they were out of the cold. So just little things like that people show up to help one another.
Thank you. And I guess maybe we'll end on that last question. So why would you say, on this parting note, it's important for all Americans to know about this site?
Well, I think it's just important to remember that, you know, violence isn't the answer, but more importantly, that through any tragedy, there is hope out there. I think, you know, the people, if you look through this museum, while it's sad, you'll also see the resilience of people, that they always feel like, you know what, there is light at the end of the tunnel, there is hope. We can have a better life. We can. So I think it's important to remember that, because all of us are going to go through some kind of tragedy in our life. That might be a divorce, it might be a loved one died, or, you know, especially COVID. A lot of people have been through traumatic experiences this last year. And I think just the overall message is that, you know, good always triumphs evil, that you can get through this. It may take a while, but there's also support out there for you. You know, we're here for one another, and just reach out. But I think it's also important from the Oklahoma Center to know that you can make a difference with the smallest things. Smile at your neighbor, give it, you know, hey, you did a good job, or, you know, can I help with anyone? You know, if somebody's sitting by themselves at the lunchroom, invite them over. So I think it's just those little things that can make a difference in this life, and it can just continue that on a daily basis, and then hope, and, you know, be willing to listen to other perspectives, and sometimes, you know, you might learn something new, or see where that person is coming from, instead of always being defensive. So just open yourself to having some civil dialogue.
Lynn, it has been such a treat. I'm going to turn it over to Katie to round us out for our presentation. But I thank you so much, Lynn, for the story of the Oklahoma City Memorial and Museum today. So thank you.
Yeah, and thank you so much for letting us take you through this tour.
Yes, again, Lynn and everyone at the Oklahoma City National Memorial Museum, thank you so much for letting us be a part of this and having us come along on this tour today. I want to hope it was incredibly powerful, and I hope to visit one day in the future when we can travel again. And everyone watching, thank you for joining us. And just a reminder, we'll be here same time next week, and we'll have a virtual tour of Ford's Theater.